thank you. And thank you guys for sticking around. The last thing that separates us all from the happy hour is a discussion about liquidity. I think, it's a good way to round out day 2 of what we're doing here. If it is day 2. It depends on when you started, folks. But we're going to start with intros just to get into everything because I think it's an important topic to explain if you're not entirely sure how the space works. But Dylan, why don't we start with you? And you can just kick off with a little bit more about what you guys are working on.
Sure. Yeah, so my name's Dylan. I'm a core contributor at YieldYak. I guess one of the longer standing projects on Avalanche. YieldYak's a yield aggregator, index aggregator that aims to attract liquidity. So I guess that's why I'm here.
Yes, all roads lead to liquidity. The name of the panel, we're going to learn much more about that. We'll just keep going down the line.
Sweet. My name is Gavin Hasselbaink. I'm one of the 3 founders at DeltaPrime. DeltaPrime is an under-collateralized lending platform native to Avalanche, and our mission is to deepen liquidity across all our partners on Avalanche and the other chains of the blockchain. Thank you for having us.
GM, everyone. I am DavideFi, the general manager of LFJ. We are the liquidity hub of Avalanche and one-stop shop solution for all trading needs of the Avalanche users. Very happy of being here with you all and talk about my preferred topic, which is liquidity.
Thank you. My name is Benedetto Biondi. I am the CEO of Folks Finance. Folks is a one-stop shop for DeFi. We have lending, liquid staking, swaps, leverage trading, leverage liquid staking. And we recently deployed our new product, which is X-Chain. Is a cross-chain over-collateralized lending protocol, which has Avalanche as hub chain. So basically, you can take loan using cross-collateral and borrowing assets on different chain. That's the particularity of us choosing Avalanche as hub chain is because we concentrate the stablecoin liquidity into the hub chain.
Yeah, part of what we're going to touch on, I think, is the do's and don'ts in terms of all roads leading to liquidity. As well as maybe what you all have learned in terms of working with Avalanche and the community at large. And Dylan, why don't we start with you too, because I feel like that's one of the things when we talk about liquidity and DeFi and the idea of loyalty and rewards, we were just hearing that discussed in the last panel when it comes to sports, but also a piece of really driving liquidity on these DeFi platforms. So do's and don'ts, we could start there.
Let's start there. Yeah, so to keep this on brand, I guess we can talk from the perspective of what we've seen on Avalanche in the past 3.5 years, starting with Avalanche Rush, their original kind of liquidity money incentives program. And you can see a pretty stark evolution from there to where we are now with the ongoing Boost program, Community Grants program. And I think the do's and don'ts, you can call out kind of looking like retroactively at what Avalanche has learned from Rush, and that's that when you're trying to kind of bootstrap an ecosystem and you're trying to generate loyalty, incentives on their own are not enough. So if you look at like maybe some of the wins and some of the L's of Rush, some projects were bootstrapped under the ecosystem and joined the community and stuck around and committed to the ecosystem,
yep. And
some didn't. And when you look at like which ones I guess won and lost, or which ones stuck around. It's not based on how much money they were given to incentivize their users. It's based on did they provide a useful product? Did they actually engage with the community? Did they build their own community on Avalanche? And I think when you look at the overall landscape of liquidity mining right now across all the networks, that's kind of the thing that sticks out is that. The money isn't enough. There needs to be, a good product, a good UI UX, and how the money is spent, where it goes, to which users, which I think maybe Gavin and others would be best suited to talk about, who have run liquidity mining programs across multiple networks.
Yeah.
That's kind of the devil in the details, and where I think we're all still learning.
Yeah, Gavin and David, I think before we got up here on the panel, we were talking about how, there might be some disagreements on this stage. It could get a little spicy in terms of how you guys look at
I'm ready.
The things differently. But I think, David, for what you're working on, I think there was potentially an alpha leak as well in terms of how you look at rewards and what you could talk about. I'll let either one of you, Gavin or David.
Yeah, so for sure. The reason that he's mentioning this right now is because I saw Davide earlier today. We had a little bit of a talk in general. It wasn't about incentives specifically. But when it rolled into incentives, there were some things that we very much agreed on, by the way, and some things we very much disagreed on. And I didn't really plan on bringing them up right here, so I don't have them top of my head. Apologies for that. It might roll on later in the conversation. What I do very much agree with, though, is what Dylan just mentioned, being that incentives on their own, they don't make or break a protocol. Indeed, if you go back in time a little bit, look at a Penguin Finance. I don't know if anyone remembers those guys.
I remember.
You remember them? Yeah, got a pretty significant grant to give away as incentives. $2 million, $2.5 million in AVAX. They vanished, right? Other protocols, initially, if you look at an Aave, for example, who initially got a $20 million, or a Benki, who initially got a $7 million, top of my head, they still remain one of the largest players, right? So if you are just starting out, this was all the way at the beginning, like September 2021, when Rush just started. If you're just starting out, if you're bootstrapping liquidity, if you do it correctly, it is necessary to bootstrap your pools. There are some alternatives, which we can dive into a little bit later as well. But it's definitely very, very helpful. For eyeballs, it's definitely very, very helpful. But just a large bunch of money will not help your protocol succeed. So nothing to disagree with so far.
David, would you largely agree with that as well? I mean, when we talk about formerly known as Trader Joe's, I mean, how are you looking at maybe the right way to incentivize, as we just heard, beyond the short-term pieces that bring people in?
Yeah, when we talk about do's and don'ts, the thing that people will probably wonder, who are the users, who are the liquidity users of a DEX? And most of the time, users that are used to swapping on a DEX think that they are the key user, but truly there's two sides of the same game. The liquidity providers are actually as much important as the users for the decentralized exchange, and building healthy liquidity is definitely the #1 do for any projects that would like to expose their community towards their token in a way that when they make swaps on a DEX, the slippage is reduced to the minimum through a very solid and strong liquidity pool. And this means making good use not only of 50-50 pools, but also of concentrated liquidity, and especially trying to have liquidity available with a decent size at all time. The don'ts in that case for a liquidity provider or a protocol having their liquidity on a DEX is to expect that incentives are the key component to have liquidity available at a healthy ratio, because actually very healthy liquidity means that liquidity providers are engaging with the protocol and are interested in providing liquidity beyond incentives. Like liquidity mining means renting liquidity, literally, and what one should have instead is to have long-term liquidity that doesn't care too much about incentives, but rather could be spiced up and reward them from time to time, but through the stickiness of the engagement with the protocol wants to remain an active member and participant of this project.
And I think it's very important because the DEX have the impermanent loss, so without liquidity mining, sometimes it's very, very difficult at the beginning to bootstrap a pool.
Yeah, that helps also to compensate impermanent loss.
Yes, so for lending protocol, it's different, but let's say the root concept is similar. So at the very beginning, if you don't have liquidity, you cannot have borrowers. So if you don't have borrowers, you don't have APR. So it's kind
of a chicken and the egg problem.
Oh, it's definitely it is. So it's a need to have liquidity mining programs at the beginning when launching a new pool, especially for borrowable assets like stablecoin. It's extremely important. But later on, like let's say, you do this, and at the beginning you may attract a lot of mercenary liquidity providers, which is fine because you need them at the beginning. but in the long run, you may want to have actual users that are sticking around with their liquidity there. And I think it's fine to have it because, again, for the same problem, you are not going to have a big lender if the pool is small. So the bigger the pool, the easier it is to have new lenders. So again, the same problem. And you may start with those mercenaries, with the incentives, but you attract later good users that are going to stick around with you, even though the APR may fluctuate in the time. And this is usually the strategies for lending protocol.
Yeah, maybe good to add one more do that I thought of when you mentioned preventing mercenary capital specifically, because we've now talked mainly about having or not having a liquidity mining program, but a very important question is where you're actually adding these incentives, right? And if you want to prevent mercenary capital, what we have learned, we've done a couple of liquidity mining programs over the years, is we have essentially two sides, just so you know. We have a lending side, we call it the saving side, the place where people deposit capital, and it is then borrowed by the prime account side. The prime account side is what makes us special. The lending side, there's 1,000 lending protocols out there and they all work the same, right? If we incentivize the lending side, people will not truly feel the essence of DeltaPrime, right? Those people are most likely to jump off to the next protocol whenever they have a higher APY. Whereas if you incentivize that, which is your USP, in our case, our prime account to cross-marginness, if you incentivize that, as specifically borrowing capital and using that with partner protocols like a yield check or a Trader Joe, if we show you that through our incentive program, there's a way higher likelihood that you stay. So a very important do from our perspective is to incentivize specifically that which you want your users to use and not just everything all across the board.
Kind of feels like there's a window of time to really execute on that, though, to go and convert someone who might just be there for the juicy way to make money, and then you have a window to educate them or at least get them using a protocol beyond just, hey, I want to make some money off this. Though, again, it's not bad to make money off things, and I think there's probably a lot of people in this room who are wondering, hey, how has it changed since those days you discussed in the kind of 2020 DeFi boom days of how I can make money here? And we've got a panel full of experts right now, so just big picture right now. What are you guys most excited about from kind of less of an operator role, maybe, for this question, and more of a user role in terms of how different the space is from 2020? That's an open question for any of y'all.
I mean, I guess I'm going to sound like a shill, but we can talk about Avalanche Boost, which is the latest DeFi liquidity mining incentives program on Avalanche. And I guess the thing that you're looking at, and when I started talking about Rush and maybe like some of the failings of Rush that have evolved is the Avalanche Foundation who are funding the program. They're a lot more intelligent about what type of products they're supporting. And as Gavin was mentioning, when you look at most liquidity mining programs like Arbitrum DAO, they just OpenBlock just released their analysis of the LTIPP, which is kind of the Arbitrum version of it. And once the program stopped, you just see TVL like fall off a cliff. It's like pretty shocking. But when you break it down by specific protocol, you see some nuance. And the nuance is, I think, what's most interesting, and the nuance is like what we just talked about in terms of like choosing the right projects and also choosing the right user activity. Like what are you paying? Like what's your opportunity cost? What's the cost to get that user to try your product, and what's the retention rate on that product? And that can be a subset of a protocol. It can be a specific protocol itself if it's like delivering to like your North Star. But oftentimes you see a lot of projects that kind of just expect support and just kind of like, hey, we're doing good stuff, we want a grant, or we want to be part of these programs. But I think that they'd be better served to think about kind of what problem are they solving for the network, and also what evidence they have to support the cost. Like we don't think too much in terms of ROI because it's a bit harder to track ROI with the anonymity of DeFi. But I think that's something that we will be getting better at with like more kind of, I guess, traditional CRM tools coming to Web3, and will be kind of important as we chart this course.
Just to quickly add on this, I think it's very important to consider that a protocol like Avalanche has a very solid long-term community. So I don't want to compare to Arbitrum specifically, but many layer tools or hyped chain right now, they are the one attracting the mercenaries. I don't think in Avalanche, yes, there's going to be, but the level of, let's say, of culture in the community is much, much higher. So people are going to stick around if they are here, even if they come new. It's much different. So I believe that in the long term, those are the type of incentives that play good.
Yeah, a big change I've noticed from the 21-22 cycle compared to the past, especially 1 year, which has been a true shift in user attention, is that at the bit in 21-22 there was a lot of focus for users in participating into the good old 50-50 pools, doing liquidity mining, and liquidity mining campaigns were the #1 way for projects to expose the community towards their project while building a strong, solid, let's say, now we could call it predatory, but honestly, it felt very much community participation. So the vibes were very different at the time. Everyone was very excited in participating into these pools. Today, the market participants are very much more sophisticated, and they engage differently with protocols. They do concentrated liquidity providing instead for deciding the range where they want to provide liquidity. They might just retreat from providing liquidity for short-term times, and the actors have very much changed also with the very strong flirt that Avalanche has seen with the meme coins, the meme coin rush, and everything that we have seen at the beginning of the year, end of last year, where there was a lot of attention, but really changed a bit the attention of assets that users were looking for. And what I'm very looking forward is a shift of attention back to DeFi, which has always been one of the strongest elements of Avalanche as a blockchain.
So the actors have become a lot more sophisticated, for sure. We have in Poland, where one of our offices is, we have we have a neighbor who we spoke to. They also have he works in a business as an employee, but on the side he does liquidity farming, and he just goes from project to project, trying to extract as much value as possible, right, in these more complicated liquidity farming opportunities. Makes $75,000 a month.
A month?
A month. I think that's quite a lot of money, to just extract from the ecosystem, right, for one person. What I'm very much looking forward to is to use, because so this is just straight mercenary capital, right? He doesn't care about the tech, he doesn't care about your protocol at all, he's just extracting value. What I'm very much looking forward to is using this data that Dylan just mentioned, where we're way more looking into, okay, what kind of strategies actually prevent mercenary capital or mercenaries to attract that liquidity, and instead really target that user loyalty. Using that data for that, so that you can get more creative strategies. For example, what I mentioned a little bit earlier with targeting the USP instead of just a spray and pray as what we've seen before.
So it sounds like liquidity defense kind of, if you're going to, carrot and a stick approach, dare I say, maybe, potentially.
Yes. Now, to be fair, we are the most stingy protocol out there, I believe.
That's an interesting branding technique.
Yeah, it's horrible, I know. Like when we launched 1.5 years ago on Avalanche, people asked us, when are you going to do an airdrop? And eventually we did an airdrop, but for 1.5 years we were telling people, don't expect any airdrop, don't expect incentive campaigns. And we did come back from that a little bit, and I'm very happy that we did.
Yeah.
But no, we are generally quite defensive indeed in our incentive programs, and when we do it, we want it really well thought out. When we collaborate with either the Avalanche Foundation or with the GMX or with the Goga Pool, all of which have run incentive programs on DeltaPrime, we want to make sure that every dollar is used to the best, right? Even if it's just from maybe a value perspective.
Yeah, I think it's, I completely skipped my own intro when I let you guys do your own intros, but I think, to compare today versus kind of what we saw in the past, Coinage kind of made our claim to fame off of the first interview that Do Kwon gave after Terra collapsed. And death spirals and things like that aside, you can think about kind of how quickly capital flew out. When it's on chain, you have to deal with that in terms of how quickly people can move money around. And I think rewards and the idea of loyalty is built around the idea of just keeping people there. And that was not a function, at least Terra didn't really operate with a way around that. But I do think this is a broader macro question as we're watching rates kind of across the globe start to come down. Like, how does that maybe change the dynamics of what we just discussed in terms of the levers that you can pull when I think, a lot of money just kind of left DeFi before when the opportunities kind of looked worse from a apples to apples comparison. Whereas now I feel like we might be entering, if everyone believes it on the stage, we might be entering the flip back to, I think, people chasing a lot more opportunities on chain.
Yeah, so I think that's true, and I think that there's kind of two ways to view liquidity mining incentives. One is to kind of like bootstrap a nation protocol, and we saw that with Rush, where you found kind of the positive flywheel where Avalanche Foundation was distributing ABAX rewards, price was going up, attracting more users, increasing volume, more rewards getting distributed, and you get this kind of like positive momentum circle. Now, we're not in that stage right now, unfortunately. So now we're thinking about it much more like with like, what's the ROI on this spend? Like, how much do we need to incentivize users to take on additional risk? So Davide mentioned like meme coin rush from a few months ago, and the cost was like quite high for people to hold quite volatile assets and LP those. That's a very risky proposition, and ultimately to attract TVL, you need to pay quite a high cost. And what we're seeing now is a bit more of a shift towards you can pay less of a cost if you're attracting them to a product with like real yield, for example, that's sustainable. The cost to attract that, like the dollar for every liquidity, the dollar in incentives for every X amount of liquidity, you get a much better ratio. Now, if we are to return into kind of a bit more of like an up-only market, I think it becomes more of like the arms race that we were seeing in 2020, 2021, where you get the positive flywheel happening on multiple networks, and then it's more of like an attention game, and you have to spend to not be drowned out because the value that's out there is just like exponentially higher, right? So right now, like, am I going to move to another network to go from like 8% to 10% on my USDC? No, but for 50%, now I'm interested. So yeah, I think those are the kind of the two different dynamics. Now, it would be great if we're heading back to those days, but I mean, don't look at me.
Well, I mean, I think it's more widely discussed now when we think about macro factors. Benedetto, we were talking before, though, about the idea of multi-chain and how some of that maybe matters less when you've got so much building in the space of being able to move from one to the other. It becomes easier, and I don't know how that kind of changes the dynamics at play if we do, as Dylan says, enter an up-only cycle where it's far easier to shift back and forth.
Yeah, so in general, I think also connecting to the Terra point, like I think that right now the perspective is slightly different. Okay, many users are always chasing the yield, but I think builders now are a little bit more, solid and thinking about, okay, we need to build something useful because otherwise I'm not going to get a grant, for example, like this story of just hyperflating a chain and whatsoever. It's not like before. Okay, maybe it still exists, but it's not like it was. Like also users do more due diligence and so on. Like, so it's different. At Folks, we always think like we need to build something useful also because I think there is a lot of competition in the industry, and we survived the bear cycle. And I think if you want to survive more, you always need to have this pivoting in your brain. So what we did with the last exchange product is we saw that there is this problem of fragmenting liquidity on many chains from protocols. You forking all the time, and you have like a pool that is different from another network to another, and they don't talk to each other. So we saw an opportunity of building this cross-chain lending protocol, which uses CCIP and Wormhole as messaging layer, and basically allows you to have collateral on Ethereum and borrow on Avalanche or vice versa. And the beauty of that is that you do it seamlessly as end users. You don't need to be aware of what's happening underneath, of paying double gas fees. This is all wrapped by the messaging layer. And plus there is the efficiency of using cross-chain assets, for example, as USDC, which we use CCTP, which is their cross-chain transfer protocol for delivering loans everywhere seamlessly.
Yeah.
And I really believe that if, as an industry, DeFi wants to compete with centralized exchange, we need more of this evolution. We need more of builders thinking, okay, we are doing good, but we need to do better, because otherwise, in the end, the big audience doesn't really care about the decentralization and so on. They want to have the easy life. So we care about the decentralization, but at the same time, we need to care about building something that can compete with centralized exchange or providers, whatever. So that's how we see it.
Yeah, with such a big environment now where there are more chain than users, it seems, the biggest concern now that protocols should have, is that actually to retain this loyalty from the users. Liquidity moves where there are opportunities, but brand connection is what truly makes this relationship turn into a loyal user base that will continue to use your front end and will continue to engage with your protocol. But what it could be risky from time to time is to think that loyalty could be bought with incentives. Loyalty doesn't come with incentives, could be spiced up, could be incentivized to have a first look, but the true relationship that users make should be with other community members of your protocol and through the brand connection that they have with you. And talking about loyalty, before you were mentioning how hard it is to track today users, and this is when I can make an announcement.
Okay, yeah, so we're entering Alpha League zone, very good.
Because we have now in closed beta now a working product, which is an attestation service. This attestation service is from the LFJ team, but for the community, so you all will be able to use it. And through on-chain attestations, will be possible to assign badges to users that have engaged with your protocol under certain criteria, and we think that this is going to be a service that is going to reward a lot the community participants of anyone that engages with the Avalanche ecosystem, because this way you will be able to target them actively and to be able to reward the real loyalty over just the general user base.
Rather than people who are just there to extract the value that we were talking about. I do think, we're going to have 5 minutes for Q&A in a little bit. So if you do have questions based off of anything we're talking about.
A question.
Well, yeah, I mean, listen, you want to get in there,
where
go for it.
Where does real loyalty come from, do you think?
Well, real loyalty comes from the users believing in what you're building and being aligned with what you are doing in this space. I might do talking a bit in a romantic way, let's say.
Preach.
I think that loyalty really comes from the mission that we are all here trying to push. We all as protocols are trying to improve and build something in Web3 that should innovate, improve over the current systems to foster the use of the blockchain over centralized solutions.
Yeah.
And when users really understand your mission, appreciate your product, your user experience, UX, UI, and what you're doing to constantly engage with them, then the real loyal user base understands what you are trying to do. And even if they got distracted and were looking somewhere else, they will be ready to come back when your product is ready for them.
So, Yeah, and I would add to that when you truly listen to your community as well. And also to come back to your earlier question, by making it more easy to switch between chains, right, for users, the competition becomes incredibly high. So in terms of incentives are going to become less and less important. They will be necessary, A, to bootstrap liquidity. Again, not necessary, there's other ways, but a very popular way of bootstrapping liquidity. And B, to attract eyeballs, but with the countless chains and products that we have, the real differentiator is going to be your USP, right? What makes you different from every other product out there, which is in a similar category.
It sounded like you were asking the loyalty question because it almost sounded like a leading question, like you might be baiting David into something.
Honestly,
and
this sounded like something we might disagree on.
You did, a little bit. I was waiting for it. I was like, okay, he's going to get into it, but it wasn't there. We keep teasing the disagreement. It's coming at some point.
Sorry for that.
It felt like a trap.
It was supposed to be a trap. There was nothing to trap.
I was on the edge of my seat.
It's a good person.
He escaped. No, there is one aspect that I wanted to also throw out because you mentioned kind of the ease of use when it comes to centralized players in the space versus a lot of decentralized use cases. And I feel like one thing that can't be overlooked this year is just the approval of the Bitcoin ETFs, which are historic in the way that so much capital has flown into those. And you also have, in the realm of DeFi, you have a lot of centralized players, including Coinbase now, getting into the wrapped Bitcoin game. This is a large question for everybody. I don't know how huge that piece is when it comes to how many centralized players are targeting the way to wrap assets across chains, and whether or not there's ever going to be a need to address maybe some of those centralized points of failure. But is there a piece to any of that that maybe some people are sleeping on when it comes to centralized players?
In general, I think that even us, that we are decentralized, we have some point of centralization.
Sure.
So it's not that I'm totally against that.
Yeah.
But I do believe that even in centralized software, bringing smart contracts is a good thing. So in that sense, like for how much we can push more and more of that, and I think Coinbase with the Base and all of their initiatives is an example, it's good. And I think the industry will go more and more towards that. And I think us, as DeFi infrastructure, we should be kind of welcoming this and not be against that. So try to collaborate, try to find, crossing paths together, because in the end of the day, the big monies are still there, and I guess they will be there, but they can flow towards our industry if we are open to that.
And keep it centralized? Keep them centralized within our industry as well?
No, I'm saying they can start to have more of smart contract and decentralization slowly. We have our own way and try to merge that.
Yeah.
I mean, the more actors, even if centralized, participate, the more assets are physically decentralized because they're more distributed in more hands. So besides, the concern mostly comes when one actor becomes too big in the sector, but Avalanche and Avalabs are doing a tremendous job in the road towards tokenizing the world assets, and the variety of tokenized stable coins of wrap assets that we see on Avalanche is one of the widest I've ever seen in any blockchain, and they are not stopping. So we cannot really do anything but welcome the more and more players to enter this space as long as users continue to pick the ones they prefer, but there won't be a centralization of too much assets under one manager.
Yeah, just to add, I think one of the, maybe overlooked things about the Avalanche ecosystem on the DeFi side is there has been a push to support new initiatives to reduce kind of the single points of failure. So sure, you have like these potential black swan events. WBTC obviously has been under a lot of scrutiny lately. USDT, there's a lot of questions there still, which is why we need kind of some of the to support some of these other players in the industry. Agora USD is launching on Avalanche. BTC.B, obviously the bridge version of Bitcoin, which is super decentralized. It's important to kind of support kind of those and call out like the wins when they're there. So.
Yeah, I just asked because I feel like, we're talking about billions and billions of dollars that are now potentially just sitting there kind of untapped. And it sounds like, rules will change. And it's fascinating to see kind of some of the TradFi giants now potentially be sitting on dollars that could be unlocked. And by dollars, I mean dollars in Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever it may be, that could eventually be unlocked relatively soon. At least that's what Hester Peirce tells me at the SEC. But we're in Argentina, and we need not talk so much about the States. So if anybody has a question, I think we do have microphones that we could get around. If there are questions for our panelists, feel free to throw them out. I see one. And then after we're done with QA, of course, if there's more alpha leaks to be done, we'll let you guys close on those. Yeah.
Hi, guys. First, I will speak on behalf of myself as a user, not as Jack or anything, but as a regular user on DeFi. Like, based on what you talked, all the capital, you should consider it mercenary. Like, everybody's looking for the best risk reward and also like sort of comfort, So, as regards the loyalty you mentioned, you should assume that everybody is going to move to other protocols all the time. And how can you make it, from a game theory perspective, slightly better for the user to use your platform? I know, for instance, David, Trader Joe were magnificent at allocating specific rewards for specific pools to where you need it. You just do not expect the loyalty. You just put slightly better than the other, and then people would come. For instance, at Jack, I know, I use it as a regular user. For instance, I don't know, ESGMX, they would boost. They would make me be better by depositing with them rather than depositing directly on GMX. Same with Wombat, Wombat Boost. Same with DeltaPrime. Most of the times, like, if you make it slightly better for the user, then the loyalty will remain. Like,
sure. I think, sorry, Derek, just cut you off. But I think you're right. It's a mix of many things. It's not one thing, right? It's not just like if you can beat them on APY, if you can beat them on UI UX, if you can be slightly better from a brand loyalty perspective. You kind of need the full package, I think, is what you're saying. And yeah, and capital is very fickle. Like,
capital
very, very
is always
fickle.
mercenary, and it should. The word rule moves like that. It's like you should assume everybody's going to move.
When you say there's always assume that everyone is mercenary, do you mean that everyone will always follow the highest APY?
No.
Okay.
They would follow like a coefficient between like the APR, the risks, and how easy it is for you to use it. For instance, Jack looping strategies. For me, it just saves me some time. So maybe I would just give a share of my emissions because it saves me time.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
DeltaPrime savings.
Right.
Perfect.
Yeah.
One click. I want like fast. Like that's not the best, but
no.
Ease of use.
Yeah,
ease of use. Yeah. And like you mentioned, indeed, like when I think about mercenary capital, my definition of that is actually, okay, if there are 18% and there's here 16% and I spend 1% on slippage, like then I'm going to move it there, right? But if you talk about ease of use, if you talk about, hey, I understand the protocol and therefore I don't have that learning curve anymore. I know the team and I feel connected with them. If all of that, which indeed is a part of your decision-making process when you decide whether or not to move protocols, or not, everyone is going to do that, right? And everyone is going to look out for themselves, and that pushes us as founders and as builders to create a protocol that's the best for the users. I think that's definitely a good thing. Absolutely.
How can I make it better for the user? And that would like.
That's the end question, right?
No, I mean, I think we only have 1 minute left. So thank you for the question. I thought that was good.
So, I wanted to know their opinion. I know you work based on this premise. Like most of the time, even though, or you do it unconsciously, I don't know, but.
It's a sliding scale, and I think we touched on a lot of those pieces too. And it's very interesting because there's a communist poster in the art installment over there too, which also gets me thinking about loyalty and reward in the world of finance and and all of this stuff too. But real quick, guys, you've got maybe like 5 seconds each for your last call, just to give a shout out to what people should be left with. Benedetto, we'll go with you first.
I think, like for us, the Avalanche journey just started, so would love that the community starts to engage with us. We have a point system recently launched, so
nice.
They are welcome to join the Folks Farm as well.
Yeah, our roadmap is so full of exciting product releases that we are very looking forward to be able to release them all to you and to see actually users engaging with our new primitives that will be the Joe V3 token mill and Joe V4 the limit order book. So we are very excited of what's to come.
Yeah, we as well. So we've had a pretty rough month, past couple of months, and we're rebuilding right now. Still one of the most by the community trusted protocols on Avalanche. So really thankful for that.
Yeah.
And really looking forward indeed for
amazing protocol. Amazing.
Back. Appreciate it.
Thank you guys so much for coming up here, and thank you for the questions. And obviously, we're the last panel today, so we're the only thing standing between you and the happy hour. So thank you guys for sticking around. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.